This is Join Us in France, podcast number 7. Hello, I'm Annie.
And I'm Elise. And we welcome you to the Join Us in France podcast, the show where we share the best of France.
Elise is a professional tour guide and art historian, and this is the podcast where we help you prepare your trip to France and share with you everything you need to know to have a great time in France. On today's show, we're going to be talking about the neighborhood called the Latin Quarter, right in the heart of Paris. And now, a little music to get us in the mood, and then we'll jump right into it.
Hi, Annie. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you, Elise?
Oh, I'm fine. How was your week?
It was pretty good, actually. The weather's been fine. I think, all things considered, got a lot of things done.
Got a lot of things done. That's good. Yeah, we've not been having such cold weather, so let's hope this stays around like this for a while.
Yeah, and this is important for travel. You know, when you come to France, you have to think about the season when you come, because there are times when it does get cold in France.
Yeah, it does. It definitely does have times of the year when it's cold, but let's face it, this ain't Chicago.
No,
We
thankfully.
don't have to worry about it,
You're not going to freeze here, probably.
No,
I mean,
you're not going to have to walk around in minus 50 degrees.
No, nothing like that. Okay. All right. So today, I see we're going to be talking about the Latin Quarter, and
Yeah.
I'm curious to know why you chose that subject.
Oh, can't you see my eyes light up when you say the Latin Quarter?
Yeah, you do like it.
Yeah, I do like it. Well, it actually goes back to my history with France and the fact that in my first travels to France, it was where I came to stay. At the time I was a student, I had a hotel room for $5, if you can imagine such a thing. And I am not 100 years old, really, And of course, it was partly because in my studies of French language and of French history, I knew that it was one of the oldest parts of France. And that was the image I had of France. And I guess that's still part of the image that I like to keep of Paris. Is the old sections and the old history. And it is, of course, and we'll be talking about that in a minute, it's the Latin Quarter, which means it's the student area. And I was still a student. So
Right.
I fit right in.
That's right.
And even though I'm not a student anymore, it's still really one of my favorite parts of Paris.
Well, you're a student at heart. That's what counts.
Oh, I'm definitely a student at heart. Don't worry about it. I'll be asking why. Even after I'm in the ground, I'll be asking why. So,
Okay. So what is it? What's there? Why should our listeners go visit?
okay. Well, why don't we take one question at a time?
Okay. Good idea.
So, what is it? Well, the Latin Quarter is actually a neighborhood. Without looking at a map, it's a little hard to visualize, I suppose. But let's say that it starts at the Seine River, actually really looking right across from Notre Dame Cathedral. And it goes south because it's the left bank, so it's on the south side of the river. And it goes back, I don't know, I'm just guessing in probably about a mile and a half. It's not a huge area.
Oh, but I mean, a mile and a half is a big place for Paris.
Yeah, it's pretty big in the sense that it covers a certain amount of territory. It's bounded literally on the west side by the boulevard called Saint-Michel. If you look in some books, I was checking this out the other day. In some books, in some guidebooks, they'll tell you that the Latin Quarter continues a little bit further west into another area called Saint-Germain. But for me, and this is just me personally, I consider that it pretty much stops at Saint-Michel, and we're going to be talking about this wonderful other area called Saint-Germain another time. So it basically starts or stops there, whichever way you want to look at it.
Yeah.
And it goes east to an area past a couple of metro stops. One stop is called Maubert, and it goes almost to what are the botanical gardens. So
okay.
it's a kind of odd shaped area, but it's called the Latin Quarter for the simple reason that it was where the university started, and it is, in fact, of course, where part of the university still is. And the university, which was begun not only in France, but all over Europe, of course, in the 1200s
Wow.
in Italy and France and
Talk
in
about
England.
old students.
Talk about old students, yeah. You failed your exam. Well, here you go again, What happened was that for all of those centuries, because the university was actually something created in conjunction with the church and came out of Roman ideas, everything was taught in Latin.
Ah.
And so when people were going to go to that area, they wound up becoming familiar with it by saying, the area where they speak Latin, which very quickly became the Latin Quarter.
Makes sense.
And believe it or not, it was the Latin Quarter in the sense that everything was taught in Latin until the French Revolution.
Oh, well,
in 1793.
Wow, that's a long time.
It's a long time. So if you consider that from the beginning of the 1200s through to basically 1800, so we're talking what? We're talking 600 years.
Yes.
All of the learning, or what we would call a higher learning, was in Latin.
Wow. That's amazing.
It's amazing, huh?
And nowadays in France, still in French schools, the better students are told you should learn Latin.
Exactly.
And they get pushed a lot. And I had to negotiate quite a lot with the principal at my daughter's junior high to get her out of Latin, because she does a lot of sports and it was interfering with her ability to get it all done. But the principal was like, but she's a good student.
That's right.
She should be taking Latin.
That's right. There's a vestige. I mean, I have mixed feelings about it because I'm not sure whether it's such a bad idea or not. But there is still this real vestige of thinking that if you are very bright and if you're going to go on to what, of course, we would call higher education, university studies, even if it's studies in science or economics, doesn't matter what it is, that somehow the discipline of learning Latin is going to help you.
Right, but reassure me, we don't have to speak Latin there today.
No. In fact, most of the time now, if you walk around, what you'll hear is what they call Franglish, So, and the Americanization of the young people, of course, is very noticeable. So you get conversations where you have French with English American words that's thrown in all the time. So don't worry about it. It's not Latinized anymore. Really not. No. But what it does mean, though, is that it is one of the oldest neighborhoods of Paris. Mm-hmm. And when I say old, I really mean that it has parts of it.
1200s.
Not only 1200s. That's the university part. And, of course, that you can still see when we'll talk a little bit later on. I'm just going to mention a few things that you can actually visit when you walk around this neighborhood.
Yeah.
But it's also the part that the Romans lived in. See?
Oh.
So if I don't know if you remember, but in one of the other podcasts when we talked about Ile de la Cité, and I mentioned that there was a group of people there that were actually the Celts or the Gauls before the Romans even came.
Okay.
They were living on that little island in the middle of the river. They were fishermen, basically.
Yes.
Well, the Romans, of course, were builders. I mean, these were the incredible engineers and builders that came all over. And they set themselves up on this side of the river. And so it's also called the Latin Quarter because it was where the Romans were going back almost 2,000 years.
Yes.
And what did they speak?
Latin,
right?
Of course.
The difference is that the Latin they spoke eventually turned into French. See? So that's why French is considered to be a Latin language.
Yeah.
Because over the centuries and centuries, with mixing in and with time and everything else, the Latin became a more popular local form, and we have French thanks to that.
Right.
So really, the Latin Quarter is both the home of the most ancient remnants of the Roman civilization there, and also the university area. And what's cool about it, to use a word that dates me, but is that it's still the Latin. It's still the student area. It's still where there are major parts of the French university. And everyone, I'm sure, has heard of the Sorbonne.
Yes.
Which is really one of the very first parts of the French university. And it's right there. Mm-hmm. And it's one of the buildings that still in fact functioning as part of the university system. So you have a huge social sciences, humanities, and even a little bit of a scientific section there. This is not a campus school, of course. This is just
Right.
buildings in the city.
Yeah.
But it gives it an atmosphere. So one of the other things that makes this neighborhood so wonderful to walk around in is that it's very lively because you have lots of students.
Right. There's probably people all the time.
People all the time.
Yeah.
People all the time. From early in the morning till late at night. You have lots of bookstores.
That's right.
Lots of bookstores, even new books, used books. It's really fun because
Books in English too.
lots of books in English,
Yeah.
books of every subject imaginable, and it's really great for browsing in the bookstores and everything. And the streets are these old, narrow, medieval streets, so it's got an atmosphere.
Right.
And one of the things I like about the neighborhood is just that it has this sense of old. And but one of the things that makes it fun is that it's filled with tourists, like you and me, and so it's really this strange amalgam kind of place. It's got all of this history, genuinely, really. And at the same time, it's just buzzing with life of students and tourists all the time.
So when you go, do you go mostly to just feel this this fun atmosphere, or do you go to visit specific places?
Well, that's a really good question. My suggestion is, depending on the amount of time you have, you either go just to stroll around, and there's a kind of walk you can do. And maybe what we'll do is we'll put this down as one of the things that people can look up when they listen to our podcasts and go to our site.
Right, I'll put it on the side.
Yeah, but we can have, there are a couple of nice itineraries you can do, because my suggestion is that if you have a few hours to just do a walk around, and you go up and down a couple of hills, you walk around, see some of these buildings from the outside, and then you get back to this small neighborhood that's very close to the river that is famous, and really famous not just with tourists, but famous with everybody in Paris, for being a huge concentration of little restaurants, a couple of nightclubs that have jazz music, really
my kind of place.
Yeah, your kind of place, and some hotels. But it's filled with life, and so
it's mostly residential. I mean, the ground level, of course, is stores and.
No, I would say no. You can't say it's mostly residential. The Latin Quarter, probably half the buildings are university buildings and administrative buildings, because they've got some other kinds of buildings there. The tiny little section that's very dense called the La Huchette, which is really close to the Seine River, is hotels, restaurants, clubs, snack takeout places, souvenir shops. It's fun. Even with my Paris friends, the people I know who are French, the people who live in Paris, people go there, you know?
Yeah, the few times I've been there, I've thought it was a fun area. And
it's really fun.
I love really the bookstores that are specialized, So you have a science fiction bookstore, which is my kind of bookstore.
Right.
And you have the esoteric bookstores and the Anglo bookstores and all sorts of, and I really enjoy that. As somebody who loves books, I could spend all day easily.
And to go back to your question, though, if you haven't got a lot of time, I think it's great to do a walk around, which really still gives you, a couple of hours of just strolling and taking a look at things. But for me, the Latin Quarter is worth a full day. And it's worth a full day because once you get done with the walk and you stop and have a coffee, which is, of course, part of what you do there, and take in Parisian life and sort of look at things.
Tea is allowed too.
Tea is allowed, yes. Even ice cream is allowed. There's a couple of really good ice cream places there.
Pastries,
and a pastry. I was going to say, there's actually a Tunisian pastry shop that has been there since my first trip to Paris, and I won't tell you when that was.
A couple of minutes ago.
It was like a little bit after the dinosaurs, but a long time ago, and it's still there. And and you can really get anything you want, from a tiny snack. There's even, shamefully, a McDonald's there, but we won't talk about things like that.
By now, there's probably subways everywhere.
Oh, please don't. I don't want to know about subways.
I'm telling you, subways are popping up all over France. It's like strange.
I
I
hope
happen to like Subway,
Yeah, I
but
know you
it's
do.
a lot of them. I'm like,
Yeah.
whoa, do we need that many subways all
Well,
of a sudden?
To be honest, I don't think we need any of them, but that's
Oh,
just
come
my
on, a
point of
couple
view.
just for fun.
But anyway, it's really a great area, and it's a place that people go to even when they're not tourists. But it's a densely populated, popular place. So it's bustling, it's noisy, it's lively. It's not the kind of place you go if you just want peace and calm.
Yeah.
Really not. However, if you walk up a few blocks, which basically means up a hill, even though you're going south, because it's one of the few parts of Paris that actually has a few hills, you get away from the crowds and you get away from the bustle. And then you get to a couple of the places that are really worth visiting and which I will actually talk about on another podcast.
Okay.
And those two places that I specifically want to describe and go into detail about are the Cluny Museum, which is actually just a couple of blocks up from the hustle and bustle, and is in fact a magnificent old house from the 1300s that has been turned into a museum of medieval art and life. And in the last few years, they actually remodeled the inside. And when they were working on it, they did some digging and they discovered the rests of the old Roman baths. And so there's a little bit of the excavation you can actually see from out on the street.
Cool.
But the best parts are to go inside and to see it. It's just fabulous.
But it's lots to see there, so we'll probably do a podcast.
We're going to
just
do a
about
whole
that.
podcast on that. And
But it's not Clooney as in George Clooney.
it's not Clooney as in George Clooney. It's Cluny.
Right.
Well, it's pronounced the same. We'll have to think about that. Maybe I can invite him. You think he would come? God, that would be
Man,
so wonderful.
We're going to have a lot of visitors that
Oh,
day.
boy. Okay. Now that you gave me that, such a great idea, Annie. And then if you go up the hill, actually you go a couple more blocks up the hill from the Cluny Museum, you get to the Pantheon. And the Pantheon, named after the Pantheon in Rome, is this absolutely incredible structure. And we'll go into lots of detail about it on another podcast. But basically, it's the tallest old structure on the south side of Paris, on the left bank, because it was created about 200 years ago. And it is a building that is immense. It's in the shape of a huge dome with a square base, but it's enormous. It's 76 meters high, which is very, very high.
Yeah.
And it was created as a church originally, but has become the resting place of the most important people in the history of France. So it is now a secular building, and it's a great place to visit both on the outside and the inside.
Can you tell us a few of the people who are buried there?
The most important one in terms of talking about the old part of Paris is Victor Hugo.
Ah, yes.
He's our main man there, okay? And then when we get around to doing the special podcast,
About it,
I
we'll-
will mention other people.
Yeah.
Just to mention, though, very quickly, one of my little pet peeve kind of things about France, which we shouldn't really talk about, but I will mention anyway, is their attitude towards women. And so it was only in the recent past that women were allowed to be buried in the Pantheon. But we'll save that for another time. We'll
Yeah,
talk about
yeah.
things like that. But anyway, so you have behind the Pantheon a wonderful little church and a couple of old streets that go back to the Roman times in Paris. And they're beautiful to walk around and look at the old buildings, and they're quiet. We're away from the heart of the busy tourist area. And there are a couple of little pocket parks,
Yeah.
so you can sit on a bench if you get tired.
So I'll look those up and put them in the show notes. So we'll give you street names and specifics in the show notes.
Right. I think that all of that would be great to have in detail.
Yeah.
And when we go back to talking about an itinerary, which maybe would be the best thing to do when I talk about the Cluny and the Pantheon, set up a kind of itinerary with the names of specific streets. That would be a really great thing to do.
Yeah.
So basically, what is there to see in the Latin
Right,
Quarter?
right.
Well, old houses and streets. The narrowest medieval streets in Paris are still in the Latin Quarter.
Mm-hmm.
You have these monuments like the Panthéon and the Cluny, which are very important.
Yep.
The oldest university,
Mm-hmm.
which is the Sorbonne.
But you can't visit that.
You can't visit the inside. You can actually go into the lobbies of
Right.
2 of the buildings. But what you can do, because they have these wonderful entranceways with these courtyards that are visible from the outside, is that you get an idea of the fancy structure of these. Because the buildings that are there, in terms of the university now, are not from the 1200s. They're actually from the 1600s. They're 17th century classical style buildings.
So they've been rebuilt, yeah.
They've been rebuilt. So for us, they're old, but they're relatively modern, and they're very beautiful. You know, everything, absolutely everything is made out of this wonderful creamy colored limestone. And it's really gorgeous to see all of this, the buildings, and they're very well kept.
Yeah.
And 2 of the oldest streets, really oldest streets in Paris, are in the Latin Quarter. One of them is the street called Saint-Jacques,
Yes.
which actually starts at the Seine River right across from Notre Dame Cathedral.
Yeah.
And it's called Saint-Jacques because it was the road that people would take going out of Paris, heading south on their pilgrimage
To Saint-Jacques
to
de Compostelle.
Saint-Jacques de Compostelle.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's why it was called Saint-Jacques.
Oh.
And another very small street
That's the pilgrimage between Saint-Jacques de Compostelle is this beautiful town in Spain.
in northwestern Spain.
Right. There's various routes that pilgrims used to walk,
Right.
including, I mean, there's some in the south, there's some in the north, there's all over the country.
They're all over the place. But
Yeah.
it's interesting to know that is actually why it got the name of Saint-Jacques,
Oh, cool.
which is very interesting because it tells you how important the pilgrimages were in the Middle Ages.
Oh, back then, yes.
And there's another street that is supposed to be the oldest street because it dates back to the Roman times, even though it was given a new name in the Middle Ages, and that's a street called Saint-Séverin, which is close to this church that's very beautiful. So there was so much to see in terms of history, and it's very beautiful.
But if you only have a couple of hours, what
Walk.
should you do?
Walk.
Anywhere? So you pop up off of the metro.
You
and
get up off the metro. In a minute, I'm going to give you some
Yes.
practical information.
Yeah.
But basically, if you only have a couple of hours, do an itinerary, a walk with your camera. This is the most wonderful neighborhood to take lots of photos in.
Yeah.
You have different kinds of buildings. You have the medieval, the narrowest street in Paris is in this area. You have the classical buildings. You have this beautiful Renaissance outside of the Cluny Museum. So
You have the massive structures. Of the
you have the
park.
massive structure. You have gardens. You have narrow, windy streets that go up and down a couple of hills.
Lots of beautiful shops.
And shops. So really, this is the most wonderful thing to do if you don't have the time to go into some of the structures and visit them and do a visit in detail.
Yeah.
Basically, what is there to do? You can walk. You can eat.
Yes.
You
yes.
can go into one of these restaurants. You can sit in a cafe and watch the world go by. Take lots of photos. Get yourself a sense of the orientation of the city of Paris. It's really, really great to do. And if you're a good walker and you have more time, you can get yourself further back behind the Panthéon. It's a little bit further back. It's maybe a short 10-minute more, but not more than that.
You mean heading south? When
Heading
you
south and slightly east, but we'll
Yeah.
talk about that with a map. And you get to the arenas. Basically, they have rediscovered in doing some renovation work in Paris that one of the arenas that existed in the times of the Romans was still relatively intact. It's not a very big one. It's a relatively small one. But believe it or not, it's part of a public park.
Oh,
And it's on a street called Rue Monge, Monge. And it's technically outside of what is the Latin Quarter, but for me, it's part of the Latin Quarter. And so you really can get a walk around that gives you a lot of history and have lovely places to stop and just sit. And one of my favorite things to do, of course, in Paris is sit and watch the world go by,
right.
look at the buildings, have a nice coffee. And since in most of these places in the Latin Quarter, a coffee's not going to be cheap. A coffee, if you're going to sit down at a cafe, at a table outside or inside, it's going to be, whether it's a little espresso or a big cafe au lait, we're talking from €2 to €3.50.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Well, that's nothing compared to Starbucks. Starbucks, you spend $6.
Yeah, except that in Starbucks, basically you get a huge quantity of fluid and you walk around with it. And here the idea is
See,
you
this
fill
is
a
where
little cup.
she's very French.
She's
She
very
doesn't,
French.
She doesn't even like Starbucks.
I love Starbucks coffee, but that's not the point. The point is Starbucks doesn't give you the feeling that you're a French or a Parisian. But what I was going to say is that you take your little drink. It could be hot chocolate. It can be tea. I know a couple of really nice cafes that we'll talk about another time in detail. And you just sit there and give yourself time, if you have, to look at things and watch the world go by.
Yeah.
So that's what you do in the Latin Quarter. And again, if you have a lot of time, go in and visit the Pantheon, go in and visit the Cluny Museum. We'll talk about the entrance fees and all that another time because that's not the purpose of this podcast. It's just to give people the desire to want to go and do the Latin Quarter.
Right.
Now, some practical information.
Yep.
You want to know?
I want to know. I don't go to the Latin Quarter very often, so yes, I want to know.
Okay, so the Latin Quarter is really, really, really easy to get to. It's really part of the center of old historic Paris. And if you have already decided to go to Notre Dame, you're basically looking at it from the church, okay, from right across the way. So there are several different metro lines that you can take that will get you there. There are, in Paris, of course, the metro lines have numbers, and they also have final destinations. But I'm just going to mention the numbers because it makes it easy in terms of the names of the stops.
Yeah.
So the lines 4 and 10 are really the easiest to use to get there.
Yep.
And you have several stops. You can get off at Saint-Michel, which is right at the edge of the Boulevard Saint-Michel, right where it meets up with the river. You have a Cluny stop. Mm-hmm. So it gets you out right there in front of the museum.
If you want to see George.
If you want to see George. Oh, my goodness. Okay. And then there's another stop called Maubert Mutuality, which is line 10. And to finish off, there's a stop called the Odeon, which is 2 blocks further west, but gets you there in 3-4 minutes. Mm-hmm. There's also a suburban train line. You know, the RER is called it's the suburban trains, the commuter trains. Yep. And those join up to the metro at Saint-Michel or at the Luxembourg Gardens, which is further up Saint-Michel a few blocks, but really easy. You just walk down and you're in the Latin Quarter.
Right.
And so many buses that I didn't even bother to make a list. There are about 12 different buses that stop somewhere either along the Seine River or a little further up. And it's really easy to get to. The Latin Quarter is basically the heart of the city, and everybody knows how to get there, and it's really easy. Now, food. Just to know that this is one of the few areas of Paris where you can eat your heart out and not spend a lot of money.
Oh, that's good.
It's good, huh? Now, you might not be eating French. You might be eating Greek or Tunisian or Indian. Mm-hmm. They're very popular in this very small condensed area around the Rue de la Harpe and Rue de la Huchette. Mm-hmm. But these are still restaurants where you can eat a full meal for 10, 12 euros.
That's really good.
And people go into them all the time.
Right.
So, we're not talking about 5-star Michelin restaurants or high cuisine, but they're fun. You can get a snack. You can get an ice cream. You can get cookies. You can get a coffee. You can get a sandwich. Mm-hmm. You can find, and there's a couple of nice Italian places. There's a couple of places that have fondue, which of course is a melted cheese kind of thing from the Savoy area. Mm-hmm. So it's got such a density of restaurants. There's even a couple, I think, of Vietnamese restaurants that you don't have to worry about your budget. Mm-hmm. You can just go and just choose one and enjoy yourself. Yeah. And you can go from anything from a tiny little snack to a full sit-down dinner and still not break the bank.
That's cool.
Yeah. There are 2, maybe 3 now, different ATM machines in the area. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to worry about cash. However, being that this is a very, very densely populated area filled with tourists, it also has a tendency to be a good pickpocket area. Mm-hmm. So my suggestion to people is to be very careful. I go there and use one of the banks there to take out cash regularly, but I do it on the inside, not on the outside, and I'm just careful to put everything away and make sure everything is closed up before I walk back outside in the street. You'll find that is one of the few things you have to really think about and pay attention to in the highly touristy areas
Right.
of Paris.
Anywhere, really, but
Anywhere, but
Paris isn't so bad, though. I mean, I go to Barcelona a lot, and that's really bad.
yeah, that's true. You're
Yeah.
right.
It's not like
But it is
Barcelona.
a fact that the Latin Quarter
Yeah.
is one of the 3-4 areas where you really just have to have your heads up about stuff like that,
Yeah,
especially
yeah.
since you're in a crowd and, you just have to be careful.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to save the best for last. But before I do, toilets. This is a problem in this area. This is not, it's a very dense medieval section. And then further up, you get into the university part. There are no open public toilets. So what you need to know is that if you have to use a toilet, you will have to go into a cafe. There is, on Boulevard Saint-Michel, there are actually 2 Starbucks and there is a McDonald's. However, they have gotten to the point now where if you don't have a ticket that shows that you've bought something there, they have coded bathrooms. You
Yeah.
have to plug in a few numbers. So unfortunately, that is one of the few things you just need to be aware of. You can go back across, if you're close to the Seine, you can go back across because there are public bathrooms in the little park behind the cathedral. However, if you're not close by, you will have to consume at least one coffee.
Right. All the cafes, all the restaurants will
They-
have a bathroom.
They will have bathrooms, but in France, they're only for clients.
Right. Right.
And so that is something, unfortunately, that you cannot get
And
around.
they often are in the basement of
Yes.
the establishment.
Yes.
So if you have mobility issues, this could be a problem.
This could be a problem. And
Yeah.
even the Starbucks, they're usually upstairs.
There you go.
There. So it's really not, this is one thing that you just have to be aware of
Yeah.
and pay attention to. And last but not least, we'll end with souvenir shopping.
Yes.
This is one of the best places for doing fun souvenir shopping.
Very good.
Just like it is inexpensive eating, you can get scarves, aprons, T-shirts, hats, umbrellas, and pretty much anything you can imagine that has
Yeah, all the normal tourist
all the
things.
normals too. But it's inexpensive. It's relatively good selection,
Mm-hmm.
and it's no different from what you'll find anywhere else. So you might as well buy it there.
Right. If you're there, buy
You
there.
might as well go and do
Yeah.
it because for a very little amount of money, I buy lots of scarves and aprons. I find really a fun thing to offer to people.
Yeah, yeah, they're for fun gifts.
Kind of
yeah.
crazy, pictures of baguettes and cheese and stuff like that on them, But so don't hesitate. You might, if you know you're coming back, you can wait and walk around and compare. But otherwise, I'd say go for it. If you're looking for small souvenirs to take back for people and it's nothing fancy,
Yeah.
here you are. It's
Yeah.
the best of
Yeah.
everything right there.
That's cool.
So we've really, you can see how much I love the Latin Quarter.
Yeah, yeah. You could spend a week there just walking around.
I could just spend a week there walking around. But then, of course, the problem is I want to go in and eat something all the time. So I got to walk some more, I think, Anyway, so that takes care of our podcast about the Latin Quarter today.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much, Elise. That's been very informative and interesting, and it makes me want to go. So.
Oh, well, I'm glad. That's the whole point, isn't it? Annie?
Okay. Well, just a reminder that we'd love for you to go to joinusinfrance.com. Leave us your comments, your questions. If you would like to go to iTunes and leave us a review, we could really use more of those. I mean, we have a few, but we would love more. And thank you to those of you who've done that already. And I think that's going to be it for us today, Elise.
Well, that sounds like a good thing to me, Annie.
Okay, we haven't said anything in French. I'll have to test the French. You said, don't French people say Cluny?
Cluny.
Yeah, you say Cluny.
I said Cluny.
Yeah,
Hey.
it's Cluny.
Hey.
It's the difference between the U and the U.
Yeah, but what difference does it make? They're all going to think of George Clooney and they're going to remember the Latin Quarter. It's better that way.
All right, well, au revoir, and we'll talk to you next week.
Au revoir. Bye.